Welcome to Mommy Favour Stories. This is the story of Queen Esther and the king. Subscribe and follow. Thank you.
Welcome to Mummy Favour Stories long ago. In a very large and powerful kingdom called Persia, there lived a great king named Xerxes the First. His kingdom was huge. It stretched across many lands and many cities. People from different places lived under his rule. Some spoke different languages, some wore different clothes, but they all knew one thing. The king was very powerful. The king lived in a magnificent palace. The palace had tall, shining pillars, beautiful curtains, and floors that looked like polished stone. Soldiers stood at the gates to guard the king day and night. Servants walked quietly through the halls carrying food, drinks, and messages. One day, the king decided to hold a very big feast. This was not just a normal meal, it was a celebration that lasted for many days. Important leaders came, soldiers came, rich men and noble people came from many parts of the kingdom. The palace was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of delicious food. Golden cups were placed on the tables. Beautiful carpets covered the floors. People talked loudly and enjoyed the celebration. During the feast, the king wanted to show everyone how great and powerful he was. But he also wanted to show them something else, the beauty of his queen. His queen was called Vashti. She was known to be very beautiful. So the king sent his servants with a message. "Bring Queen Vashti to the banquet," the king said. He wanted her to stand before the guests so they could see how beautiful she was. The servants quickly walked through the palace to deliver the king's message. But something unexpected happened. Queen Vashti refused to come. She did not obey the king's order. The servants returned to the king and told him the news. When the king heard this, his face changed. He became very angry. In those days, a king's command was supposed to be obeyed immediately. No one was expected to say no to the king. The king called his wise advisors. "What should we do?" he asked them. The advisors thought carefully. Then one of them spoke. "If the queen disobeys the king," he said, "women across the kingdom may begin to disrespect their husbands too." This worried the king, so the advisors gave him a suggestion. "Remove Vashti from being queen," they said, "and let the king choose another woman who is better than her." The king agreed. So Queen Vashti was removed from the palace, and she was no longer queen. Time passed. After a while, the king began to feel lonely. The palace was still beautiful. The servants were still there. The guards were still standing at the gates. But there was no queen beside him. The king's attendants noticed this. So they came up with an idea. "Let beautiful young women be gathered from all over the kingdom," they said. "They can come to the palace, and the king can choose one of them to become the new queen." The king liked the idea. Soon the order went out across the entire kingdom. Messengers traveled from city to city. They announced that young women would be brought to the royal palace. Many families heard the news. Many girls were taken to the king's palace to be prepared to meet the king. Some were excited. Some were nervous. Some did not know what their future would look like. Far away in one of the cities of the kingdom, there lived a young Jewish girl. Her name was Esther. She was kind, she was gentle, and she was very beautiful. Esther did not live with her parents anymore. Her mother and father had died when she was young, but she was not alone. She was being raised by a good and caring man named Mordecai. Mordecai loved Esther very much. He protected her and cared for her like his own daughter. Every day he made sure she was safe. Every day he guided her and taught her the right way to live. Life was simple for them, but one day everything was about to change. The king's officers arrived in the city. They were searching for young women to bring to the palace, and soon Esther's name was among those chosen. She was taken from her home and brought to the great palace of the king. Esther did not know it yet, but her journey was just beginning. And the little girl who had lost her parents was about to step into a story that would one day save an entire nation. After Esther was taken from her home, she traveled with many other young women to the great royal palace in the land of Persia. The journey felt long. The palace was far bigger than anything Esther had ever seen before. The walls were tall and strong. Guards stood at every gate, holding long spears. Inside the palace were beautiful gardens with flowers, fountains, and clean walking paths. Everything looked rich and grand. Esther felt a little nervous. She had never lived in a place like this before, but she remembered the words of the man who raised her, Mordecai. Before she left home, Mordecai had spoken carefully to her. "Esther," he said gently, "remember who you are. Be wise, be kind, and do not tell anyone that you are Jewish." Esther listened carefully and promised to do as he said. Inside the palace, the young women were placed under the care of a palace officer. His name was Haggai. He was responsible for preparing the women before they could meet the king. The women could not see the king immediately. First, they had to go through many months of preparation. They were given special baths with sweet oils and perfumes. They were given beautiful clothes and jewelry. Servants helped them learn how to walk, speak, and behave in the royal palace. Some women tried very hard to impress the palace workers. Some tried to show off their beauty. But Esther behaved differently. She was gentle. She was respectful. She listened more than she spoke. Because of this, Haggai quickly noticed her. He saw something special in Esther. She did not try to push herself forward. She did not act proudly. She simply behaved with kindness and humility. So Haggai decided to help her. He gave her the best place to stay among the women. He assigned servants to assist her. He also made sure she received the best beauty treatments and care. Every day, Esther continued to behave wisely. And every day, Mordecai came near the palace gate. He could not enter the women's quarters, but he stayed close enough to hear news about Esther. He wanted to know if she was safe. He cared about her like a father. Days passed, weeks passed, months passed. Finally, the time came when each woman would go to the king. One by one, the young women were taken into the king's palace at night. The next morning, they would leave and move to another part of the palace where they would live as part of the king's household. But only one woman would become queen. Then Esther's turn came. Before she went to see the king, Haggai asked her what she wanted to take with her. Some women asked for many jewels and fancy things, but Esther did something simple. She only took what Haggai suggested. She did not try to decorate herself too much. She trusted the advice given to her. When Esther walked into the king's presence, something amazing happened. The king, Xerxes I, looked at her and immediately noticed her. Among all the women who had come before her, Esther stood out. Her beauty was gentle. Her spirit was calm. Her presence was graceful. The king liked Esther more than all the other women. Soon he made a big decision. He placed the royal crown on Esther's head. Esther became the new queen of Persia. The palace celebrated with a great feast. The king made a special holiday to honor Esther becoming queen. Gifts were given to many people across the kingdom. It was a joyful time, but even though Esther was now queen, she still kept one secret. She did not tell anyone that she was Jewish, just as Mordecai had told her. Meanwhile, Mordecai continued to sit near the king's gate each day, quietly watching and making sure Esther was safe. Neither Esther nor Mordecai knew that something very important was about to happen, something that would one day save the king's life. After Esther became queen, life in the palace continued as usual. The palace was always busy. Servants walked through the halls, guards stood at the gates, messengers carried important news from one place to another. But outside the palace, near the king's gate, there was a man who came there almost every day. His name was Mordecai. Mordecai often sat near the king's gate because that was where many officials and guards gathered. Important discussions sometimes happened there. People passed through the gate all day. But Mordecai was not there for power or fame. He was there because he cared about Esther. Even though she was now queen, Mordecai still wanted to make sure she was safe. So he stayed close to the palace where he could hear news about her. Every day he would come, sit near the gate, and quietly watch the activity of the palace. One day, while Mordecai was sitting there, he overheard something very dangerous. Two of the king's guards were standing nearby talking quietly. Their names were Bigthan and Teresh. They were responsible for guarding the door of the king's palace. But something was wrong. The two guards were angry, very angry. They began whispering to each other. "We should get rid of the king," one of them said. "Yes," the other replied. "We can attack him when the time is right." Mordecai listened carefully. His heart began to beat faster. These men were planning something terrible. They wanted to kill the king. If their plan worked, the whole kingdom could fall into chaos. Mordecai knew he had to act quickly, so he found a way to send a message to Queen Esther. When Esther heard the news, she immediately understood how serious it was. She quickly reported the matter to the king, but when she told the king, she made sure to say that Mordecai was the one who had discovered the plot. The king ordered his officials to investigate. The guards were questioned carefully. Soon the truth came out. The two men had truly been planning to harm the king. They were arrested immediately, and the plot was stopped before anything bad could happen. The king's life had been saved. The event was written down in the royal record book, a special book where important events in the kingdom were recorded. Mordecai did not receive a reward right away. In fact, after the event was written down, life seemed to return to normal. Mordecai continued sitting at the king's gate. Esther continued her life as queen, and the palace continued its daily activities. But even though it seemed like a small moment, this event would later become very important. Very, very important. Because soon, a new man would rise to great power in the kingdom. And this man would bring great trouble to Mordecai, Esther, and all their people. His name was Haman. After the king's life had been saved and the story was written in the royal records, life in the kingdom continued as normal for a while. Queen Esther lived inside the beautiful palace. Servants attended to her. The palace halls were always busy. Music, meetings, and royal activities continued every day. Outside the palace near the king's gate, Mordecai still came regularly. He sat quietly among the other officials and guards who worked around the palace. But something new was about to happen in the kingdom. One day, the king Xerxes I decided to promote one of his officials to a very high position. The man's name was Haman. The king gave Haman great power. He placed him above many other leaders in the kingdom. This meant that Haman now had authority and respect from many people. The king also gave a command. He ordered that whenever Haman passed by, the people at the king's gate must bow down to him as a sign of honor and respect. So every day when Haman walked through the gate, the officials and servants would quickly bow down low before him. Some bent their heads, some knelt down. Everyone tried to show respect because they knew the king had commanded it. But there was one man who did not bow. That man was Mordecai. When Haman passed by, Mordecai remained standing. He did not kneel. He did not bow. The other officials at the gate noticed this. They were surprised. "Why do you not obey the king's command?" they asked Mordecai. Day after day, they questioned him. Finally, Mordecai explained the reason. "I am a Jew," he said. Mordecai believed that he should only bow and worship to God, not to a man. When the officials heard this, they reported it to Haman. One day, as Haman walked proudly through the gate, he looked around and saw the people bowing. But then he noticed something that made his face grow dark with anger. Mordecai was still standing. He had not bowed. Haman was furious. His pride was hurt. His heart filled with rage. But instead of punishing only Mordecai, Haman began to think of something much worse. When he learned that Mordecai was a Jew, he became even more angry. "If Mordecai is a Jew," Haman thought, "then I will destroy all the Jews." It was a cruel and evil plan. Haman decided that every Jewish person in the kingdom should be destroyed. Men, women, children, all of them. Haman went to the king and spoke carefully. "There is a group of people living across your kingdom," he said. "Their laws are different from everyone else. They do not obey the king's laws." Haman made the people sound dangerous, even though they were not. "It is not good for the king to allow them to remain," he continued. Then Haman made a terrible suggestion. "If the king agrees, let a law be written that these people should be destroyed." The king listened. Without realizing that these people included Queen Esther herself, the king agreed. He even gave Haman his royal ring, which allowed Haman to seal the law with the king's authority. Soon, the order was written down and sent across the entire kingdom. Messengers rode out quickly on horses. They carried letters to every province of Persia. The letters announced a shocking command. On a certain day, the people were allowed to destroy all the Jews in the kingdom. It was a dark and frightening moment. When the news reached the cities, many Jewish people were filled with fear. Some cried, some prayed, some did not know what to do. Meanwhile, Haman and the king sat down to drink together in the palace, as if nothing terrible had happened. But outside the palace gates, when Mordecai heard the news, his heart broke. He tore his clothes in deep sorrow. He put on rough cloth and covered himself with ashes. He cried loudly in the streets, because now the lives of his people were in great danger, and the only person who might be able to help them was the queen. And that queen was Esther. But helping her people would mean risking her own life. After the terrible law had been sent across the kingdom, fear spread everywhere. In many cities, the Jewish people were crying. Families were worried. Parents held their children close. No one knew what would happen next, and the message had been sent to every part of the great Persian Empire. The law said that on a certain day, the Jewish people could be attacked and destroyed. When Mordecai heard this news, his heart broke. He could not stay quiet. He tore his clothes to show his deep sadness. He put on rough sackcloth and covered his head with ashes. In those days, people did this when they were in great sorrow. Then Mordecai went into the city crying loudly. His voice was full of pain. People looked at him with concern as he walked through the streets, but when he reached the king's gate, he had to stop. The palace rules did not allow anyone wearing sackcloth to enter the royal gates, so he stood outside, mourning and crying. At the same time, Jewish people in many cities were fasting and praying. Some wept loudly, some refused to eat because their hearts were heavy with fear. Inside the palace, Queen Esther did not yet know what had happened, but soon her servants came to her with news. They told her that Mordecai was standing outside the palace gate wearing sackcloth and ashes. Esther was very troubled. Why would Mordecai be dressed like this? She quickly sent clean clothes to him so he could change and feel better. But Mordecai refused to wear them. He did not want comfort. He wanted Esther to understand how serious the situation was. So Esther sent a trusted servant to speak with Mordecai and find out what was happening. When the servant reached Mordecai, he explained everything. He told him about the evil plan made by Haman. He explained how the king had signed a law that allowed the Jewish people to be destroyed. He even showed the servant a copy of the law that had been written. Then Mordecai sent a message back to Esther. He told her something very important. Go to the king, he said, beg him for mercy. Ask him to save your people. When Esther heard this message, her heart began to race. She knew there was a big problem. In those days, there was a strict rule in the palace. No one was allowed to go to the king without being invited. If someone entered the king's court without permission, that person could be killed. There was only one way they could live. If the king held out his golden scepter to them, they would be spared. Esther sent a message back to Mordecai. Everyone who approaches the king without being invited risks death, she explained. And I have not been called to see the king for many days. It was a very dangerous thing to do. But Mordecai sent another message to her. His words were strong and serious. Do not think that just because you are in the palace you will escape, he said. If you stay silent at this time, help for the Jews will come from somewhere else, but you and your family will perish. Then Mordecai said something that would change Esther's heart forever. Who knows, he said. Maybe you became queen for a time like this. Those words stayed in Esther's mind. Maybe God had placed her in the palace for this very moment. Maybe she was meant to help her people. Esther thought deeply. She knew the danger. She knew the risk. But she also knew her people needed help. So Esther made a brave decision. She sent one more message to Mordecai. Go and gather all the Jewish people in the city, she said. Tell them to fast for me for 3 days and 3 nights. Do not eat or drink. My servants and I will also fast the same way. Then Esther said something very powerful. After that, I will go to the king. And then she said the words that showed her courage. If I perish, I perish. Mordecai heard Esther's message and quickly went to tell the Jewish people. Soon many people began fasting and praying. They were asking God for help. because the next step Esther would take could change everything. And what happens when Esther walks into the king's court? For 3 days, the Jewish people prayed and fasted. They did not eat. They did not drink. They asked God to help them. Inside the palace, Queen Esther was also fasting with her servants. She was preparing herself for the most dangerous moment of her life. After the 3 days were finished, Esther got ready. She put on her royal clothes. She looked like a true queen of the kingdom. But inside her heart, she was still nervous. She knew one thing very clearly. If the king did not accept her, she could die. But Esther remembered the suffering of her people. She remembered the words of Mordecai. Maybe you became queen for a time like this. So Esther gathered her courage. She slowly walked toward the inner court of the palace. This was the place where the king sat on his royal throne. Guards stood nearby. The room was quiet and powerful. On the throne sat the great king Xerxes I. Esther stepped into the court. Everyone could see her. The room became very still. This was the moment that would decide everything. The king looked up and saw Esther standing there. For a moment, no one moved. Then the king's face softened. He was pleased to see her. Slowly, the king lifted the golden scepter in his hand and stretched it toward Esther. That simple action saved her life. Esther walked forward and gently touched the tip of the golden scepter. The king smiled and spoke kindly to her. "What is it, Queen Esther?" he asked. "What do you want? Even if you ask for half of the kingdom, it will be given to you." But Esther did not immediately tell the king about the danger facing her people. Instead, she spoke calmly. "If it pleases the king," she said, "please come today to a banquet that I have prepared for you, and bring Haman with you." The king agreed immediately. So later that day, the king and Haman went to the special banquet Esther had prepared. The table was filled with good food and sweet wine. The king was pleased. Again, he asked Esther the same question. "What is your request, Queen Esther? Tell me what you want." But Esther still waited. She had a careful plan. "If it pleases the king," she said again to you, "please come tomorrow to another banquet I will prepare. Bring Haman with you again." The king agreed once more. But Haman left the banquet feeling very proud. He was happy that the queen had invited only him and the king. It made him feel important and powerful. But as he walked out of the palace gate, he saw someone standing there. It was Mordecai. And just like before, Mordecai did not bow. Haman's joy disappeared immediately. His anger returned even stronger than before. He went home and began boasting to his family about his wealth and power. But then he complained about Mordecai. "All of this means nothing to me," Haman said angrily, "as long as I see Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." Haman's wife and friends suggested something cruel. "Build a tall gallows," they said. "Tomorrow morning, ask the king for permission to hang Mordecai on it. Then go happily to the banquet with the king and queen." Haman liked the idea. So he ordered his servants to build the gallows that very night. He believed everything was going exactly the way he wanted. But that same night, something unexpected happened in the palace. Something small, something simple, yet something that would change the entire story. That night, something strange happened in the palace. The king, Xerxes I, could not sleep. He turned on his bed again and again, but sleep would not come. The palace was quiet, but the king's mind was restless. So he gave an order to his servants. "Bring me the book of the royal records," the king said. This was the book where important events in the kingdom were written down. The servants brought the book and began to read it aloud to the king. As they read, they came to a certain story. It was the story of the time when 2 palace guards had secretly planned to kill the king. And it was also the story of the man who had discovered the plan and warned the king. That man was Mordecai. The king listened carefully. Then he asked an important question. "What honor or reward was given to Mordecai for this?" The servants looked through the records. "Nothing has been done for him," they replied. The king was surprised. A man had saved his life, and yet he had never been rewarded. Just at that moment, someone entered the palace court. It was Haman. Haman had come early that morning to ask the king for permission to hang Mordecai on the tall gallows he had built. But before Haman could speak, the king asked him a question. "Haman," the king said, "what should be done for a man whom the king wants to honor?" Haman's heart filled with pride. He thought the king was talking about him, so he began to imagine the greatest honor possible. "For the man the king wants to honor," Haman said proudly, "bring royal clothes that the king himself has worn. Bring a royal horse that the king has ridden, with a royal crown on its head. Let one of the king's most important officials lead the man through the city streets on the horse, announcing loudly, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" The king smiled. "That is a good idea," he said. "Quickly take the clothes and the horse and do exactly as you said for Mordecai, who sits at the king's gate." Haman's face fell. The man he hated was the man he now had to honor, but he could not refuse the king. So Haman placed the royal clothes on Mordecai. He led him through the streets on the king's horse and announced loudly to everyone that Mordecai was being honored by the king. Afterward, Mordecai returned quietly to the king's gate, but Haman hurried home in shame and sadness. Soon servants arrived at Haman's house. It was time for the second banquet prepared by Queen Esther. Haman went to the palace with the king. Again they sat together at the banquet table. The king once more asked Esther the question he had asked before. "What is your request, Queen Esther?" This time Esther spoke. Her voice was calm but serious. "If I have found favor with the king," she said, "please spare my life and the lives of my people." The king was shocked. "Who would dare do such a thing?" he asked. Esther pointed directly at Haman. "The enemy and the wicked man is this evil Haman." The room became silent. The king stood up in anger and walked out into the palace garden. Haman realized his life was now in danger. He rushed toward Esther, begging for mercy. But when the king returned and saw Haman near the queen, he became even more furious. The king gave the order. Haman was taken away and punished on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. His evil plan had failed, but Esther's courage was not finished yet. The king gave Haman's position to Mordecai, and a new law was written that allowed the Jewish people to defend themselves. When the day came that Haman had planned for their destruction, the Jewish people were ready. Instead of being destroyed, they were saved. Across the kingdom there was joy and celebration. The people rejoiced because they had been rescued from danger. To remember this great deliverance, the Jewish people began celebrating a special festival called Purim every year. It became a time of joy, sharing food, and remembering how courage and wisdom saved a nation. And that is the beautiful story of Esther, a young girl who became queen